Hello and welcome. My name is Jess and you're listening to Legaltini, your very own sip of law school. The goal of this podcast is to give you just a taste of what it's like going to law school. Whether you're already in school, considering it, have a loved one currently experiencing the fun that is law school, or you just want to follow my journey, I'm so glad you're here. You can also follow me on Instagram at legaltini_podcast and check out my website legaltini.com. And if you enjoy the podcast, don't forget to rate and review below. Grab your Legaltini and let's take a sip. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to talk with you. Everyone join me in welcoming Miss Imani. Imani, tell us about yourself. Tell us kind of just like your elevator pitch of like who you are.
Sure. First, thank you so much for having me. My name is Imani Maatuka. I'm currently a commercial litigator at Sidley Austin in their Dallas office. I'm originally born and raised from Champaign, Illinois. I went to undergrad at North Carolina A&T State University, Aggie Pride. And then I traveled back to St. Louis for law school. And so now I'm in Dallas.
Awesome. That's amazing. Okay, so taking it way back, like let's start at the beginning here. When did you know you wanted to be a lawyer and how did that journey start for you?
Yeah, well, so it's actually funny. I come from a family of attorneys. So
Really?
The question wasn't, are you going to law school? It was more so, when are you going to law school? Exactly. And where are you going? And can you come closer to home? So I always knew I wanted to be an attorney. My mother's an attorney, my godfather, my uncle, my aunt. So,
wow. Okay.
But it was a privilege because I got to see just so many different facets of the legal industry at such a young age, knowing that, oh, like my mom is like the quintessential litigator, you know, in the court a lot. She would take me to her oral arguments. Like one of my favorite memories is watching her argue in front of the Seventh Circuit. So like my entire life, I knew, well,
you grew up in a courtroom.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then like, you know, they're all litigators, but it was like I saw that diversification within litigation, which I think a lot of people don't really talk about, because all litigators aren't in a courtroom every day, even though that's a component of it. You know, there are different areas. And like, you know, my aunt, she was a litigator who went the in-house, you know, corporate route. And so I knew very early on, okay, I could do this, I could do that. And then it was more so about just finding my path and what kind of made me tick and what I enjoyed the most. So,
yeah. Well, the world was your oyster. I mean, you had so much exposure already that you kind of already knew what your options were. That's incredible. I feel like that's so different than people who are coming in without any background. Like no one in my family is a lawyer. And so I didn't really know. I knew, you know, what a lawyer was on TV and kind of what that seemed to be, but I have learned, I feel like I've been in a crash course of just like what lawyers are in general, just because I didn't have that exposure. So that's incredible that you had that, because that probably meant that you could hit the ground running a little bit faster. And it seems like you have really hit the ground running just based on what you have going on in your life and the things that you've already accomplished. So I think that maybe it was a benefit for you.
Yeah. And I just want to highlight one thing you said, Jessica, because that is like one thing I think has like frustrated me my entire career, my law school career, is like how the media paints attorneys, you know, like, because like if you don't have that exposure, you know what I mean? And you're watching like Law and Order, or you're watching,
which is
like,
probably so accurate.
Right. And it's like you could grow up thinking like, I don't want to do that at all. Like this is like, that's your only idea of what it means to be an attorney. And it's just such a limited area of our industry. Like there are so many facets, there are so many industries that you could get into. Everyone, like no matter what, like corporate industry there is out in the world, they have an attorney on their team.
True.
And so like, just like having that lack of visibility frustrated me, because like I 100% recognize like I'm a child of privilege, and you know, having that background, having that experience does plenty for your career and your prospective career. But like just the lack of visibility, information out there for young kids who didn't grow up with a family of attorneys, who don't know what different areas of law. I don't know. I could go on and on about that.
No, and even just like the way that the media portrays, and I feel like the response that I've gotten from a lot of people when I say I'm in law school is like, oh, when are you going to turn into a mean person? Or like, when are you going to turn into this asshole person? And I'm like, oh, I feel like I could be a kind person still and be a lawyer.
Or the, you know, you're a liar, you know, all lawyers are liars, like you can't trust them and whatever. And I'm just like, I don't know, like lawyers are your confidants. Like lawyers are the people who you can tell them where all the bodies are buried and like, you know, they've got your back. Like it's just so funny to me, kind of like, you know, our media personification of lawyers. So.
Well, and I think that it's important to try to break that stereotype and break those norms that, I don't know, where did they even come from? But I think it's great what you're doing, and you're kind of trying to like break a lot of boundaries and a lot of barriers. And I want to talk about that like in detail a little bit, but I want to stick with kind of starting at the beginning. So tell me about your law school experience. Tell me like what surprised you about law school. Obviously you had a lot of exposure previously, but was there anything that sort of stood out to you as not what you were expecting?
I mean, I think all of it was not what I was expecting. I mean, you have to think like, even though I do come from a family of attorneys, I think there's like a generational gap. And like law school has changed so much since they were in law school. Like, for example, like, you know, people used to do legal research out of books. Like there was no
there was no Lexis.
There's no Lexis. Like, I mean, even that, like my mom would be like, oh, you need to go to the library every day and you need to be reading this and blah. And I'm like, that's online. And she's like, yeah, when I was in law school, I didn't have a laptop. So I was like, okay, so let's start there. We are very different. My God. So a lot of it was surprising. I think also, you know, I had kind of like planned this whole thing out, very type A, but I knew, you know, I wanted to get into a good law school. I wanted to work at a big firm. And like, so to do that, you know, I did undergrad in 3 years, you know, I graduated top of my class, and I was like, I'm going to law school for free, period. And so I kind of had like the benefit of, oh, she's a baby working for me, because I applied to law school when I was 19 years old. I started when I was 20 years old. So I was a child. I mean, like, and if you just think, you know, you're in law school. So, you know, I would say like the median age is like 26, 28. You know, people are going to law school as if it's a second career.
Right.
We had, I think, like a very small K through JD population. Like my class was full of people with PhDs, doctors, you know,
yeah, people returning for like a different path. Yeah.
Exactly. And so like I think all of that, just being in, you know, a school filled with so many just intellectual people, so many experienced individuals, you know, people who had lived a life. I don't think I was expecting that. And like coming in kind of, you know, milk behind my ears still, I think that was just a really interesting dynamic, because you have to think like kind of like in a dual or parallel sense, you know, I'm in law school and some of my best friends are like 20 somethings, you know, just graduated from undergrad, living their best life, being a girl. And it's like, okay, like I'm doing a law school thing. And it's like not just school, like it's not just grad school. It's like one of the hardest like academic experiences that you will ever go through.
Yeah, I can attest to that.
Right. So you're doing that while some of your friends are just like living their best life, going on trips, you know, having hot girl summers. So I think just that entire experience was so just kind of out of body and like not what I expected from a mental standpoint, emotional standpoint. And then on top of that, you know, fortunately, I got my first year of law school, but then COVID hits. So then it's like, okay, relearning everything in like the COVID-19 pandemic, and which no one gave you a crash course.
No one was planning for that. Yeah.
Exactly. So like, it was just like, I could go on and on, like a lot of parts, a lot of moving parts, and like figuring things out overnight and just adjusting and readjusting and replanning. So,
well, and I think that's really, I don't know, it's frustrating on one side because obviously that changed everything. And I think it made it a lot more challenging to be in school because you're on Zoom and that's just not engaging and it's hard. But I think the neat thing is that it also probably taught you a lot of resilience and just like figure it out, because no one's holding your hand telling you how to do this. You have to figure it out. And there's probably a lot of that that's benefited you in your career and kind of steps you've taken later, being able to kind of adapt quickly to situations, move on and just be like, okay, we're changing gears. We got to go, like next thing.
Absolutely. It definitely taught me that like tomorrow is never promised, you know, like every plan that you have, you need a plan B, maybe a
Right.
plan C. And the fact that things didn't go according to the first plan doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. So I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah. What internships did you do over your 2 summers?
So I actually worked at Sidley both of my
Okay,
summers.
great.
So I did my first year summer at Sidley in the Dallas office, and then I returned for my second summer. Everyone like I like, and you can probably attest to this, your best friends in law school are usually like your 2L, 3L mentors, like the people who went through it already. And so when you're a 1L, they're like, hey, let me grab you by the ear and tell you all the things that I did wrong
Right.
and tell you like how you can do better than me. And
Right.
like, I love those people for it, of course, because like it takes a special person to recognize like, hey, I went through a really hard time and I'm going to make it easier on the next generation. I'm going to pay it forward and help people come through along the way. And fortunately, I had several people like that in my life who, you know, went through the OCI process, went through like, how do I get a big law job, and who grabbed me very early on. And I mean, like, early, like, April admitted students day, like when you come through and you already announced like I'm going to watch you, but you're finally on campus, get to interface with students, and they grab me there like I've got you, whatever you need. And you know,
Wow.
helping me over the summer, just preparing for classes, what should I expect, and then knowing kind of like what my timeline looked like. You know, I'm very old school. It makes me feel old now because my brother is a second year law student at WashU, and I know
Oh.
like the recruiting process has changed entirely since I was in law school. So this will date me. But when I was in law school, you know, recruiters couldn't talk to you until like December 1st. You know, we had those now guidelines where it wasn't like the first moment you step on campus, you were getting a job. Like that
Right.
was not the deal. So for us, like it was really like, okay, you need to hunker down, do really well on your finals. And then after finals, you can submit all these applications, but the firms wouldn't really talk to you until you got your grades back. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it's like,
Right.
okay, well, how'd you do? Where are you like in
Right.
your
Let's not
standing?
waste our time if this isn't, a good relationship.
Exactly. And like for everyone listening now, it's totally not like that. You know, my brother, he got his job the summer before he even got into law school. Like he was interviewing with people. Like it is like very different now, which is awesome because I think it takes
Interesting.
a lot of like the stress off of, you know, being a law student and being a student first instead of like trying to find a job. Because I think when you're doing those two things in tandem, it can be a little sticky and messy because then you're trying to juggle, okay, how much do I dedicate to my studies and like, you know, making sure I do well and I'm exceptional and I'm the best candidate possible versus how much do I put to, you know, networking and interfacing with these attorneys, going to their receptions and all of that. And so I think, you know, now stretching out this recruiting process makes that juggle a bit more manageable, which I kind of like.
Well, and that's interesting that you say that because it must be different in different regions of the country because at my law school, it still is very much like we have OCIs coming up in January. It's like everyone is preparing right now for that. So there is still some of that, although I will say we've had a lot of networking opportunities this fall. And so I think it's kind of maybe a hybrid of what you're describing because we do still have OCIs coming up and like no one has a job yet that I know of. So that is interesting.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, maybe it is a regional thing. I don't know, but I know I was super surprised. And then like when I was a 2L, 3L, I think they had just gotten rid of it. And then I had like 1L mentees who, you know, were getting their jobs in September. And I was just like, what is going on? Like, was I like
That's
dumb?
wild. Well,
I
and I'm
would have
sure that COVID probably had a big impact as well because you had to probably do your interviews over Zoom. And like, I mean, that would be a huge shift in kind of the dynamic and how you even interact with people and get jobs.
Yeah, that is a good point. Fortunately, I didn't have to do anything over Zoom because you know, I started fall 2018
Okay.
and then you know, COVID was 2020. So I got like a full year and first semester of 2L
Got it.
before things just like totally shifted overnight. And fortunately, I was in the boat of I kind of like had a job. I think it was more so like, you know, the freak out of okay, everyone's summers were getting canceled. Some people were like, their offers were being rescinded. So I was like, oh my God, do I still have a job?
That
Fortunately,
is unreal stress.
I did. Yes. I mean, when you're talking about resilience, like class of 2020, class of 2021, class of 2022, 23, I mean, like these kids have gone through so much.
Yes.
Which I know just makes them better persons, better attorneys, so yeah. But so 1L, I do the final exams. I did pretty well, and then I start like just shooting off applications like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But I fortunately had a few people in my ear, and they were like, oh my gosh, Imani, like, the Texas market is growing overnight. Like, so like this, like, I feel like 2015 to 2018, that was kind of like when you were hearing in the news, all these companies moving their headquarters to Texas, relocating, like we're moving to Texas. And it was just like every day you hear like another company announcing that.
Yeah.
And so, of course, as you know, when companies are moving to certain locations, the attorneys follow, because you want to be able to like interface with your clients and be there for their needs, understand the market, etc. And so I had a ton of mentors just grab me by the ear, like, listen, it's hard enough to get a first year, like a job as a 1L, right? Like those 1L positions are a dime a dozen.
Exist, yeah.
Exactly. And it's understandable. I mean, you have to think like you have nothing to offer,
absolutely nothing.
Especially if you're a K through JD, like you're a baby, you don't know anything. Like you have one semester of grades, like you've taken like the basic doctrinal courses, like what really sets you apart. And what they're trying to do is like get people who are a bit more serious, who have some experience under their belt, who have maybe done an internship, the summer before. And that's like your 2L class. So like, of course, they're really setting out most of their class spots for second year law students rather than the first year. So I found that, Chicago, LA, DC, some of the New York, these bigger markets, when you look at these firms, they really have like 1 to 2 spots for first year law students, which is like all fine and dandy, and more power to the people who are going for those. But I am a probability girl.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
When you were hearing that these Texas law firms, big law firms, because they had just moved to, the market, they were growing their office, they're hiring like 5 to 6 1Ls. Like my Sibley 1L class had like 5 or 6 of us, which was like big.
That's a lot. Yeah.
When I would talk to my friends, they'd be like, oh no, like I'm the only one, or there's one other one, the rest are all 2Ls. And so like, I just knew, and I thank these people to this day for this advice. They were like, Imani, listen, you're not tied to a market. You've gone like all over the place, which was true. Like I did undergrad in Greensboro, North Carolina. I was in law school in St. Louis. I was I was born and raised in Champaign, Illinois. I had done internships in undergrad in Chicago. So I was familiar with a bunch of markets. I had family in Dallas, so they were like, you're not really tied anywhere. Why not go where you have the best shot? Like
where you can get the experience.
Exactly. And you can get a really great firm. Like, and I was like, duh, like say less.
Yeah.
And so like that's like kind of like the short story of how I ended up at Sibley Dallas. And I absolutely loved it, and just ended up, accepting my return offer, coming back for a second summer, and then full time.
I love that. So now how many years have you been there?
So it feels like
100.
3. Yeah. I mean, because like you do your whole life here. Like I feel like I've been here for as long as I've been in law school, which obviously.
Well, and that makes sense because both of your summers were there. So that does stretch it out a lot.
Exactly. But officially just 1. So I'm a second year now.
Okay. Got it. And with that experience, you sound like you love it. Like you sound like this is such a great firm. Is there anything about it, not, HR stuff, but like, is there anything about it that's like, this is not what I wanted, or any regrets about that? Or do you feel like, no, this is absolutely my avenue. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I think, I'm 100% thrilled to be here. I love it. But I know people like that authenticity, and like sometimes, it can feel like I'm a bit jaded. Like I'm just loving it because, it's new and it's fresh. I think when I like look back, and if I was going to like, mentor someone else and tell them about my experience, what I would say to them, I think what I tell them is like, prepare for transitions. And it's not like that's foreign to you. You know, you go through transitional periods throughout your entire life. There's a transition from high school to college. There's a transition from college to law school. And of course, there's a transition from law school to the actual practice of law. And so I think with any transitional period in your life, you know, you're going to go through ups and downs. You're going to have like, you know, those days where you have that sense of like imposter syndrome, where you don't feel like you're enough, where you're second guessing yourself, like, did I make the right decision?
Right.
And I think that is like super normal.
Yeah.
And I want us to normalize that, because it's not like something's wrong. It's not like, oh my God, this is the end of the world. It's just that you're going through a transitional period, you know? And like, so for me, I think it was like intensified by the fact that like, one, it's a transitional period because you're starting your big girl job. And like, as a K through JD, this was my first full-time job. So like,
it's
I'm
a
transitioning.
Huge change.
Exactly. And to like working every single day, like not having this built-in school vacation for no reason.
Not having your December off, all of that.
Exactly. So like you're transitioning into that. I was transitioning into a new city, you know, like finding new friends and like figuring out how to balance, you know, friendships, your intimate relationships with your job. Like that's a whole transition in itself. And then finally, like the practice of law, like fixing your brain where you're no longer a law student and, you know, talking about legal theory and stuff, and like figuring out like, how is this like more pragmatic? What's practical? Like, what do you actually do in practice versus what do you talk about for fun?
Right. Learning these concepts is like, oh, how existential, and let's think about how that impacts things. And then you get into practice and you have to actually advise someone on an action to take, or you have to, you know, actually go through a case, and that's just a totally different thing.
Exactly. And so I think like that's why I paused when you asked your question, because like all of that, I think, you know, like in the abstract, that's hard. You know, that's like really tough. Like that can have someone go through like really hard times emotionally, mentally, maybe even physically. But I know like, fortunately, I have my village. You know, I had friends who were going through the same exact thing at the same exact time, you know, law school friends. I had people at my firm, you know, my first summer class, you know, they were working with me. I have this group text, we call it like in the trenches. And it's like these two girls who were going through the same thing, you know, we're learning at the same exact time, and we're each other's support system, you know, and almost like become best friends, you know, within the practice. And so like I had that. And so like, despite this really tumultuous, you know, transitional period, despite everything that was going on, to people from the outside looking in, like, oh my God, I'd be miserable or whatever, I was having the time of my life, you know, because I embraced that experience. I embraced being in this transition, not knowing all the right answers, you know, learning things every day and just like figuring it out and really proving to myself that I can do this and I can do it well. So I have been having the time of my life, and I know like, but like I'm laughing at myself because I know like, you know, I was just on the Above the Law podcast and we were having this discussion, but you know, I grew up reading Above the Law, and you hear these horror stories about big law, and like that like sets in this feeling of so much anxiety for people coming into the industry. And like, I promised myself I would never be that person. Like, as bad as it got, you know, like I'm gonna let you guys know the good side of all of this, like the upside, because there's so much, there's so much upside. And I feel like people don't talk about that. They focus on the negativity, and then it makes everyone think that this is something that it's not. Like, it's truly unbearable. Like, you don't understand how people can like go through this. And it's like, I mean, I've met some of like my best friends. I've had people pour into me, into my career, people who have just like pulled me next to them and been like, I'm going to teach you everything I know.
Like, let me show you the ropes. I've got you.
But in such a genuine way where it's like, I like want to work my butt off for you because you've made it clear that you care about me as a person. You care about my career. And like, to me, like that is like, that's like one of the most valuable things that you can come across just in life, period. And because of that, I've enjoyed myself so much.
Well, and when I want to go back to something you said about just how like people kind of act like this is this awful career. So many people that I tell that I'm in law school are like, oh God, run away. Don't do it. It's awful. You know, and mostly before I started law school, I think once you're in, they're like, well, now you're here. But before the fact, they kept saying, is it too late to, you know, turn back now? Because it's such an awful experience. And I remember my 1L year, and they're sharing all of these stories, and they're not talking about the positive parts, but there are so many positive parts. I mean, I have had an absolute ball in law school. I mean, it's hard and it's a lot of work, but I'm having so much fun, and I'm meeting incredible people. The professors are incredible. The school is incredible. Like, it's just not that bad. It's not that scary. It can be intimidating at times. It can be, you know, overwhelming. It can be stressful, all of these things. Yeah, but like, that's life. Like, that's just how it goes. And any industry you go into, you're going to work hard and you're going to be stressed out. You might as well do something you're really passionate about. And that's going to, you know, you're going to do well in. So I agree. I want people to start talking about the fun parts. I mean, that's part of my, you know, kind of purpose with Legaltini, is just like, hey, I'm having a lot of fun. And this is really a great opportunity for a lot of different kinds of people, even if you don't think you're like the lawyer type, or you're already in a different career and you want to make a change. I mean, this is a great way to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And I love what you're doing. I mean, I think the reason why people like us like have such a good time and have such a great experience is because the people who came before us like really pulled us up and poured into us and paved the way. You know, and like that's what you're doing with this podcast. That's what I'm attempting to do, you know, with speaking out on these issues. But yeah, I agree 100%. Like, we're not going to deny that like the legal industry is a saturated market, and like you do take on a ton of loans. But I think that's why it's so much more important to go into it so informed, to go into it with a village, go into it with, you know, mentors and sponsors who will help you get your career to the next level.
Right. Absolutely. So speaking of kind of making some changes in perceptions and kind of making an impact on the industry, can you tell us a little bit about this Bridge the Gap scholarship and what you're hoping to do with it? Tell us more.
Yeah. So first I'll talk about the inception, because I think that's what makes Bridging the Gap scholarship unique.
Okay.
So I actually started it with 3 other first-year WashU law students, spring 2019, right? And so like it started just by like having a conversations with, these were my literal friends, you know, like we were taking classes together, we were hanging out all the time, and we just had like real conversations about our prospective careers, you know, the process of getting a big law summer associate position, all of that. And what we realized is that what we considered just like basic knowledge, what we considered just like everyone knows this, no one actually knew, you know. And like we would have these conversations with people, and like one off the top of my head, like this girl asked me like, why are you applying to all these firms? And I was like, well, that's kind of what you do. Like, that's why you go to a really good school, because, you know, these big law firms come to recruit from here specifically. And like, they'll sometimes only like take from certain law schools, only take from a certain, you know, grade or like, status or ranking in the class, you know. And so I was like, what do you mean? Like, this is the thing. And like, she had no idea like how much big law summer associate positions were paying. Like, you can make like upwards to like 40K in 10 weeks. And I remember having this conversation and like watching like the blood drain from her face. And she told me like, wait, like that's more than my mom makes in a year.
Wow.
And like, for me, that was just a moment, like, first off, it was like a check your privilege moment. Like, what? Are you kidding me? But 2, it was like just kind of like a generational moment. Like, you could break so many generational curses. Like, you could literally establish like generational wealth just by way of like knowing these opportunities exist.
Right. And providing those resources.
Exactly. And so like, to me, that like, it was so frustrating to me. Like, big law is like the best kept secret that's not a secret. You know what I mean? Because there are so many kind of like barriers and obstacles that go into
getting it feels so inaccessible.
Exactly. Because it is like, it's a prestigious industry, you know, you're working for some of the best law firms in the world. And so they want some of the best law students. But think about how differently students, especially students of color, would approach the entire law school admissions process had they known that certain opportunities opportunities exist. And that's why I was really harping earlier about like the media, because if your first impression and only impression in some regard are like, okay, all lawyers are public defenders, all lawyers are prosecutors, all lawyers are DAs, or insert here, you know what I mean? And you don't even acknowledge or even understand that there is such a larger industry and different facets at play. It's almost like you're making like uninformed decisions, and it's like this illusion of choice for me. So if you think that I want to be a lawyer and I want to do XYZ and this is like the practice, but you only think that because that's all you know, like, is that really what you're choosing, or is that just your lack of information, And I just basically, and this is what we mission for with creating and establishing Bridging the Gap Scholarship, is everyone's going to be on a level playing field, because you're going to know at the offset what is out there. You know what I mean? You're going to know, and you're going to be able to make an informed decision, because you're going to know, well, if I want to be in big law, for example, I should probably be striving for maybe a higher ranked law school. I should probably be really trying to get my grades up in undergrad and like graduate where I have a really good GPA. And then maybe like I should, now they're doing away with the LSAT, which I love. But like in my case, it was like my parents paid for me to get an LSAT tutor so I could get a really good LSAT score to be where I was. You know what I mean? But it's like, at least at the outset, these students know what it takes to get into or have a seat at the table like I do. You know what I mean? I want to demystify this entire process.
And it sounds like what you're talking about is these people would then have a plan. And instead of just kind of like, oh yeah, maybe I'll go to law school. Who knows what that means? And then like, maybe I'll start applying places. Like, it sounds like what's important kind of in what part of the mission is that you want them to understand the gravity of those decisions that are happening far before your actual choice in law school or your actual application to these firms. Everything before that really matters a lot.
Exactly. And then to our earlier point, I think that's why so many people have issues with the legal industry and with this career, because I think so many people come into, I want to be a lawyer, uninformed, don't have a plan.
Right.
And then you have $200,000 in loans, no job. And it's like, oh my God, like, yeah, I would be telling people the same thing. Don't be a lawyer. Don't go to law school.
Of course you're drowning.
Exactly. If that was my situation. And so like, I just think it's like, it's almost like our duty, because we had great experiences, because we had people pave the way for us. It's our mission and our duty to pay it forward and help the next generation do the same.
Yeah. So if a listener wanted to get involved either by donating and being supportive or by applying for one of these scholarships or kind of getting access to that, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so actually our applications open the first week of January. Perfect. And we have a website, bridgingthegapscholarship.com. We're also on Instagram at BTG Scholarship. You can follow me on Instagram at Imani Maatuka. I talk about this at exhaustion. So
you have to, you got to do it.
Exactly. But yeah, any of one of those ways, you can definitely connect with us. I love speaking to students, even if you're not a BTG scholar. I'm happy to share my experience and like any advice that maybe I would. Yeah.
And so how regularly are you doing? Is it a drawing, or how do you select the student that receives the scholarship?
Yeah. So people submit applications, there's a essay portion, and we look at resumes, GPA, and then we select based on the applicant. So actually our first class of BTG scholars, all of them were just amazing. And they went on to go to top law schools themselves. We have people at Cornell, Georgetown, Penn, and one at my alma mater, WashU. Nice. And so we're just trying to duplicate and keep going.
Sure. So shifting gears a tiny bit, you're working in big law, you're running this scholarship fund. How do you find the time for all of this? Obviously, big law is like, you are busy. You are a busy woman. Like, how do you find work-life balance and all of that?
Yeah. Well, so like, and I get so much.
Or maybe you don't. I don't know.
No, well, I do, but I think the key to it for me is outsourcing. I have a team. I have people who do a lot of things for me, from social media to the PR to making my house look beautiful, to making sure I look beautiful, like a glam team. And like, that is like what keeps me sane. That's what keeps me leveled. Everyone has different values. To me, I value like my mental stability. I value my time. And so like if I get more time, like I have not cooked in 2 years. Like I have a chef who comes every day and he makes me whatever I want.
You're speaking
And like
my language.
like stuff like that, it's just like that's what makes me happy. That to me is what makes this job doable. I don't have kids right now. I have a puppy who I feel like is my kid, but
Yeah.
I'm not married. And like this is the time where I can really be selfish and focus on me and my needs. So that's how I do it. I have a wonderful masseuse who comes to my house once a month and takes care of me. Like I have invested in things that I value.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, because then and you referenced this earlier, but like once you're filled up and like other people are filling you up and you've got a full cup to pour from, then you can do all of these things.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Exactly.
If you didn't pursue law, this is kind of off topic. If you didn't pursue law, what were you going to do? I know your like whole life was pointed to law, but if someone took law off the table, what would you have done?
That's really interesting because like I did have like passion projects throughout my life. Like when I was in high school, I like had the unconventional kind of like high school job. I was a 3-sport athlete, so I didn't really have time to like go work at the random fast food restaurant after school that a lot of my friends were doing. So instead of that, I started getting into like event and party promotion. Unfortunately, Champaign, Illinois is a huge college town. U of I is right there. And so like I feel like that like created kind of like a party culture in our high school for better or for worse. But I took advantage of that and I started like renting out like ballet studios, campus bars when the students were gone. And throwing my own events, and I started making like 10 grand an event, which like some of that I like it was like some of that was a down payment on my townhome in Dallas. Like it's so funny.
Wow.
Anyways, so like, and I love that. And then when I got into college, I majored in public relations, and for like a few years I had my own PR firm just with some of my best friends, and like we actually were pretty successful. We threw a music festival. It was sponsored by Smoothie King and this like local studio. And we did like sponsorship acquisition for a lot of our nonprofit clients and raised them like over like 6 figures. And one of our largest clients was Black Interior Designers Network. And so like I love that. Like if we were talking about passion projects like PR, branding, event promotion, sponsorship acquisition, like that stuff like makes me feel all fuzzy inside.
Well, and that's kind of what you're still doing on the side. Like that's kind of still what you're doing.
Yeah, but now it's like more targeted. Sure. So rather than like me profiting and like just doing it for random clients, I'm doing it because like I feel like I want to give back, and so like it's really about like what I'm passionate about and giving back and paving the way for the next generation of attorneys. But if I was not an attorney, I'd totally be doing something in PR, like building someone else's brand, helping nonprofits like get to the next level from a funding standpoint, or who's to know? I don't know. But like that stuff like just makes me warm inside, and I love it.
Well, and I love asking people that, because for a lot of people who this was their thing, like you were going to be a lawyer, there was no real question about that. I think it really speaks to like what your real passions are, because your career is one thing. And I think a lot of people do that for a passion reason. But a lot of people also are like, I need a career that's going to pay me well, that's stable, that's secure, that I know people in, I have resources there. But then like the warm stuff that makes you, like you said, feel fuzzy inside. I think that's a neat, I don't know. I love when people still pursue their passion projects.
Yeah, definitely. Or even how your passion projects can fuel your career in law. Like at the end of the year, we've had our reviews, and like I think one of the things that stuck out to me, and one of the things that attorneys who supervise me and oversee me say all the time is like, you just know how to brand yourself, like you have so much confidence, and like you walk into a room, like even though we know you don't know anything because you're a first year, or now I'm a second year practicing attorney, but you like walk with such confidence and like speak with such diction, you know how to command a room. And I think that comes from knowing how to brand myself, knowing how to make sure that the Imani Maatuka brand that you get is exactly what I intended to be. and something that you walk away with, like happy
Mhm.
with. And so I think it's just funny how, so many different facets of your life can come into your career. I talk to other people, people who are more artistic, and it's like those people's like decks, for example, like you've seen like
Yes.
probably, or maybe not, but like a trowel deck, like that thing can be like gorgeous. That is not my forte. Like, don't have me on the PowerPoint.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, know your strengths, right? Like know where you're at.
Right. Like, it will not be cute, but like some people, like they just know how to make an amazing presentation, like make you like it's appealing, it's eye-catching, like, you don't feel like you're talking about random legal jargon and like being bored out of your mind about the precedent or whatever. So I just think it's like it's amazing how people's like personal skills and qualities can come through and shine through in their career.
Yeah, well, and I love what you said about your personal brand and creating that brand and being intentional about that brand. And I've talked about that in previous podcasts, actually, because I really think that we've already started, even before law school, like you've started creating your brand, and it's important that you're intentional about it. It matters. People do care. Yeah. And I think with our current generation that's so obsessed with social media and so, image conscious of like, you're posting something every hour, it feels like sometimes. And there's just this, like, your brand can change kind of mindset. But in the career world, you can't. If you screw it up, then you're screwed up. Like if you create a name for yourself that you're always late or that you're not good on your word or things like that, that will stick and it will follow you. And that's not something that you want to be described as when, a potential employer calls someone to say, like, what do you think of Jess? Like, how was she at this last job? You don't want the moment of hesitation where they're like, right? Like you want them to enthusiastically recommend you. And that branding has to be intentional. Where did you learn? Absolutely. Where did you learn to do that? Like, what can you like attribute that skill to?
I mean, like outside of family, I would say experience, like learning very early on. I was, like I said, a 3-sport athlete. So I've always been like in the business of like proving myself, impressing others, working harder than others to like put myself at the top and like show my dominance or whatever, like that competitive nature, you know what I mean? But also like being rewarded for your hard work, being rewarded for your diligence. I learned that very early on, for better or for worse. Right. But always thinking like, oh, I did a good job. Where's my little star, my gold star? Exactly. But you learn that very early on. But I also think law school teaches you this too. Like think about it. Again, this is like controversial and I have my own thoughts about it, but for better or for worse, those first semester grades kind of like ride with you for a really long time in your law school career, and so for some people, that's amazing. You hit the ground running, you did really well that first semester, you get that summer associate position that you were really striving for, and then you get a return offer because you did so well during the position. For some people, it's really problematic because, they didn't have people supporting them, or they didn't do so well that first semester and then they're trying to like build it back. But like in law school, you learn, hey, first impressions matter. Yep. I really need to hit the ground running. I really need to show all that I can do. And it's the same thing in your career. You need to hit the ground running. You need to be the person who's the first one at the office, maybe the last one to leave. Yep. And like just showing people like, I care about this. Whenever you get a project, doing like your all to make sure it's a great work product, like dotting your I's, crossing your T's, because that's what matters. And that's what people remember. Right. And like, fortunately, maybe later you have room to like, kind of like mess up and like, just be a regular human because you built up that rapport with people so early on.
Well,
so
and people then know that you're quality, that like your work is going to be quality. Exactly. And then later, if it slips or if something falls off, they're like, well, but that's not Imani. Like, that's not who I know she is. And they might even check in on you and say like, everything okay? This isn't like you.
They give you the benefit of the doubt. That's what you're trying to get, the benefit of the doubt.
Yes, no, that's exactly right. And actually, talking about the first year or first semester rather grades, a really good friend of mine, actually, she's a attorney in Dallas as well. But I interviewed her on the podcast months ago, but she was talking about how her first semester grades were actually not as great as she wanted them to be, but she did get a big law internship and she did get to do, like, she still had those opportunities because she made up for it in other ways. And, so I guess to be less doomsday, but like, these grades are so important, but you can wiggle in, like it is still accessible.
Absolutely.
You can figure it out, have the drive to figure it out.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. I mean, I tell people all the time, like, you can either be like super, super like great at school and like super book smart, top of your class, whatever, or you can be a people person.
Yeah.
And like when you walk into a room, people just fall in love with you. And
Right.
I think people like forget that that's so important, especially in an interview process. When you're going through a day of interviews, how are you going to make all these attorneys remember Imani Maatuka, right? They're already interviewing like 20 other people that day. Like, what is going to make them remember you, like being charismatic, like being easy to talk to, having things, being relatable, and I think so many people like devalue that, which doesn't really make sense. And that's why I think you see sometimes like people who are at the top of their class, like maybe not at the most prestigious firm or position or whatever it may be, because you still have to have like, you have to be multifaceted, be a person, great student. That's hard. You got to be a jack of all trades.
Yeah, no, and it's a challenge, but I think developing that package and like creating that and building each of those skill sets simultaneously is what makes you a good lawyer in the end anyways. Like those are also the things you need when you're talking to clients and when you're working with families, and you still need that. So like building that skill now is really worthwhile. And I think when people have worked before law school, like I worked for several years before coming back, you learn that when you are in the work world. And so then when you come back, you recognize that and understand that. But I think you're right that there is sort of this, I just have to make really good grades and then I'll get a job. But there's still an interview. Like there's still, you still have to relate. And like you were saying, kind of be charismatic and have questions prepared and be relatable and all these things that it's hard. That's hard to learn to do.
Well, and you have to like when you're actually working in these positions, like you're working in a team, it's not like you in your office with the door shut all day, like working silo by yourself. Like, no, you're on calls with your team. You're interfacing with these people. I tell people all the time, like when you're a junior associate, your client is the senior associate and the partner. And so like, it's your job to make those people fall in love with you, like be their go-to, be their MVP. And so like, to your point, like it's so hypercritical, that you recognize like the value that you bring, like not being a Debbie Downer, like lighting up the team, being a yes man, being available, you know what I mean? Like that can set you apart in so many ways. And I think sometimes, regardless of whatever mistake you make, because when you're a junior, you will make mistakes, period. People can like kind of look and gloss that over because it's like, no, but she's a hard worker.
She's working her tail off.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, and it goes back to that. You want the benefit of the doubt. Like you want people to really trust that you are really putting your best effort into something. And I think that the way you communicate that and the way you get that across to people is in all of those sort of other ancillary areas, because your work product isn't going to be good when you're a junior associate. It's just not. But you can do it in the way that you dress, the way that you approach problems, the way that you talk to them, the way that you interact with your coworkers. I mean, you can present yourself as this great package hard worker, even if you don't have the knowledge to back that up yet.
Right. No, absolutely. I tell people all the time, like, being a junior in big law is like the highest paid apprenticeship ever. You know what I mean? Like you're just learning so much every single day. That's why you're there. Like they know you don't know anything. And they're expecting you to like be a sponge, soak up as much as you can, like every year be able to look back. Like I know how to do that now. Like I'm competent in these areas now, and keep building on these skills. But yeah, and these experiences. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, perfect. Well, Imani, this has been such a pleasure getting to speak with you. Is there anything else that we've missed that you've like just burning in your heart that you need to share?
No, but thank you so much for having me, Jessica. But thank you so much for having me. Like I love having like these conversations, and like what you're doing is great, and like you should really feel proud of yourself for facilitating something like this. So
no, this is great, and I will definitely drop your like contact information and the website for all of your stuff so that we'll get everybody on the same page about how to submit applications and things like that. So very exciting. Thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely getting to chat with you.
Yeah, so nice to meet you.
Well, that is it for this week's episode of Legaltini. A big thank you to Imani for spending the time with me this morning and talking about big law and preparing for transitions and the Bridge the Gap scholarship, all the many things. Wow, so many things that we talked about in the gold nuggets of information that she shared. So thank you very much for joining me, and I hope that you guys will all join me next week on our next episode of Legaltini, your very own sip of law school.